might need to be taken, and it is prudent planning on the part of our forces there, and of course the South Korean forces, to make sure we're doing everything possible. But it is an annual exercise. We have seen the rhetoric from North Korea. We've seen that rhetoric in the past, and of course we would urge the North Koreans to do what they can to ease tensions in the Korean Peninsula, and that's certainly something we would welcome. Hold on, I'll go to Aaron and whoever.
Thanks, Peter. Just to clarify, you said these can't go on indefinitely, these discussions. So is there a date, a rough timeline that this building says, at this point, we have to break off discussions and find that plan B?
We're not going to put a calendar deadline on it. I'll defer to Secretary Kerry, who's leading this effort very admirably in trying to move this process along. He's been obviously, I'll leave it to the State Department to characterize it, but had tireless efforts to try and make this happen, and we will continue to support his efforts. But at some point, if we don't see progress, again, there's not going to be a resolution here, and we think there is an opportunity to ease the situation in Aleppo, but more importantly, Aaron, to address the wider situation. There's an opportunity for Russia to use its significant influence with the Assad regime, and we have yet to see them demonstrate a willingness to do that. And so for now, the suffering of the Syrian people continues.
So just aside to that, we keep asking about no-fly zones a lot, and I'm just wondering if you can just, for me, because I'm not that smart in this stuff, what is the difference from the podium view between a formal no-fly zone and what's been declared over the last week, which essentially seemed to be hey guys, don't fly your planes there. That's a zone you can't fly in because our guys are down there. So I'm trying to understand what the difference is in this building's viewpoint.
The distinction here is that we're going to defend our forces where they are. And we're not going to tell you exactly where they are, but we have been operating in that area in particular. We made that clear to the Syrian regime last week through the Russians, through our memorandum of understanding. And we, again, would advise them to steer clear of areas where we're operating.
So it's just a matter of a geographically fenced-off area versus where our forces operate?
Again, the message should be clear to the Syrians that we're going to defend our people. And I think we demonstrated that last week. Courtney.
What do you mean by our forces? Do you mean specifically U.S. or does that also mean the YPG? Because it was our understanding that after that initial round of strikes by the regime last week that the Americans left, but the U.S. continued to fly caps for a matter of days. So what do you mean by our forces? Does that extend to the YPG? Or were we wrong that the Americans did not leave?
I'm referring specifically to coalition forces that are on the ground. I'm not going to discuss specifics.
Non-Americans, then, non-Americans, right? Our forces, because you've used that term over and over and over. I don't think it's unreasonable to ask for a clarification on what you mean by our forces. That includes non-Americans fighting with, or with the U.S. or with the coalition.
There are forces on the ground that we've been working with that are fighting ISIL. We'll continue to provide support to those forces. You know, there are our own coalition forces on the ground, and we'll continue to defend those forces on the ground, particularly as they conduct their partnered operations.
Because in Hasaka, after the Americans left after the initial round of airstrikes by the Syrians, the U.S. continued to fly caps over the area to discourage the Syrian regime from additional strikes on the YPG that were there. So that would mean those caps were flown to protect the YPG, non-americans who were there on the ground.
I'm not going to.
It's a simple. I mean,
I'm not going to discuss where our forces are at this moment in time.
I'm not asking you to.
And we're going to continue to provide support and provide defensive support, in particular, to forces on the ground engaged in the ISIL fight, and particularly in those forces that are partnered up with coalition forces.
And why can't you say whether the U.S. is continuing to fly caps over that area? For several days we were told. I mean, you just understand if someone tells us something for several days in a row and then just refuses to say it, you can understand why that raises a question in our minds. So why is it? Is it suddenly a force protection concern?
The question should be answered that we are going to provide air cover and air support to our forces on the ground, where they may be. We're not going to disclose where they are at any particular time. We did indicate that they were in that particular area, had been operating there previously, and that's why we provided that particular warning for that area. But I'm not going to disclose where our forces are in Syria at any particular
And I'm
time.
not asking you to, but again, we were told last week, and correct me if I'm wrong or we were all wrong,
I
but we
was
were
not
told
here last
that
week, so-
I know. But we were told that the Americans, after the initial round of strikes, the Americans left. Yet the U.S. continued to fly caps. So I don't understand why you can't tell us whether the Americans are continuing to fly caps there. What is it? What is the reason? Is it because the Americans are back on the ground? Is that what the concern is, or?
I'm not going to get into all of our air patrols, our missions, sorties at this moment in time. And I'm certainly not going to describe where our forces are on the ground for understandable reasons. And we'll continue to provide support and continue to protect our forces and their partnered operations on the ground. And I'm sorry I can't be more specific, but I don't want to divulge some of that
If
information.
you tell us something, if we are told a fact day after day, it's like if every single day you tell us exactly how many troops are in Afghanistan, and then one day you just refuse to say it, you can understand why that raises a question in our minds of why.
We're going to do what we can to protect our forces. And
I'm not asking you to put the forces in danger. I'm just asking you to be consistent. If you're going to provide us information, then explain why you can't.
well, you know, we fly missions in a range of areas in Syria, including in that area. So it would not be unusual for us to continue flying sorties over that area.
Raises the question even more why you wouldn't acknowledge if you're continuing to fly caps there. But okay, fine. We're going to just headbutt on this one. So can you talk about Jarablus then? What is going on there? And the Turks announced today that they've conducted a bunch of strikes. There's some artillery strikes, and they say that they're hitting at ISIS militants, but also some YPG. What is the U.S. military's understanding of what's going on there? Are the YPG being struck by the Turks? And
I'll leave it to the Turks to describe their military activities. I know that ISIL is certainly present in Jarablus, and this is a critical spot on the Turkish border. It's been an area that's been of concern, of course, because of the foreign fighter flows. And so anything that puts pressure on ISIL anywhere in Syria, but particularly in an area like that is of such significance, is important. And we want to see ISIL ejected and removed from as many parts of Syria as possible, including there.
they've also been striking YPG there, with the same YPG that the U.S. was protecting last week. So is there any U.S. military outreach to the Turks? Any concern about the fact that they're hitting a U.S. ally who the U.S. is working on the ground with in other areas?
I'll leave it to the Turks to describe their operations and what their goals are, but the focus should be, in our view, the fight against ISIL and targeting ISIL, and from what we've seen, that's been happening.
But again, is the U.S. military concerned that the U.S. partner, the YPG, are being struck in Jarablus right now? Is there any concern by the U.S. on that?
Our concern and focus remains ISIL, and doing everything we can to target ISIL and to keep the focus on ISIL, including making sure that the efforts of forces on the ground stay laser focused on ISIL itself and not.
So you're concerned that the YPG were being struck in Hasaka but not in Jarablus? Is that the concern? Or is it who's doing the striking?
Our concern, Courtney, is ISIL, and the fact that ISIL is present in Jarablus and any other part of Syria, any other part of Iraq, continues to be our concern. And our focus will be to try and shape efforts focused exclusively on ISIL, and we're going to continue to do that. Bill.
I understand that General Scaparrotti was in Turkey today. Do you have anything on that?
I do understand he was, bear with me one second. I know that he was there and he met, I think he was at Incirlik itself. And my understanding is he met with Turkish officials there, some of his counterparts, and of course talked about the importance of the NATO alliance and the vital role that Turkey plays in that alliance. I don't know if he's already wrapped up his visit, but I know he was there today.
Do you know if the Jarablus operation came up or the Hasaka?
I'd have to refer you to EUCOM for that.
Okay. With the Hasaka, you said that there's not a no-fly zone, but you're instructing Syria not to fly there. So what's the difference between those two?
Again, our warning to the Syrians is the same that we've had for some time, that we're going to defend our forces. And they would be advised not to fly in areas where our forces have been operating. And that's what happened last week.
And when you say our forces, you mean coalition forces, not just U.S.?
Coalition forces and our partnered operations.
So, but that seems to be a change from what we knew before, right? I mean, are you now threatening to shoot down aircraft that come near coalition forces, that threaten coalition forces?
I made clear we're going to defend our forces on the ground. Absolutely.
Okay. Previous to this, we had not known that U.S. aircraft would engage Syrian aircraft had they threatened coalition forces on the ground. But that's now the policy.
Again, I want to be clear here. We're talking coalition forces and partnered operations on the ground that are focused on the ISIL campaign, Bill. We've been talking about this from the start. We always said we would defend our forces. We have U.S. forces in this instance that were on the ground in that region, and that was obviously our first and foremost concern, and continues to be our first and foremost concern. And we're going to continue to do everything we need to defend those forces.
I understand the U.S. forces part, but you're saying our forces, meaning coalition forces, which is that's a pretty wide blanket, and that means that there are a lot of potential engagements out there now. If you're saying that you're threatening to shoot down Syrian or Russian aircraft that could engage our partners on the ground.
I'm going to leave it where I think we've been quite clear what we're doing here, and that's defending our forces on the ground. And when they're conducting partnered operations, we're going to defend those too. And we're going to. That's the message we sent to the Syrians, and we're going to continue to defend our forces. I'm not going to get into specifics about where our forces are and hypothetical situations in the future. That is where we are. That is what we're going to do to defend our forces and our partnered operations on the ground.
Peter, are you saying that that's only when they're in action against ISIS? Maybe I just was missing it until now.
You know that, Barbara, that our focus is against ISIL, and the work that we've been doing in that part of Syria and elsewhere is all focused against ISIL.
On the ground is when they are in operations against ISIS, not any broader action they might be doing separately. Is that
Our
right?
focus all along in Syria has been on ISIL, working with local partners on the ground willing to take the fight to ISIL. That continues to be our focus. That's why we are on the ground in those areas, and we'll continue to. That will be our mission in Syria.
Understand we're all really looking for some clarity here, and I know it's difficult, but is there any way you can just clarify these points, because we keep asking? So is it that the extension of the protection to partnered forces on the ground, YPG or SDF, is when they are in action against ISIS? Is that right?
We've been prepared and have in the past used our air power to support forces on the ground taking the fight to ISIL and to defend them, and we are prepared to defend them.
So it's when they're in action against ISIS. Not
That's what we're doing with them right now, Barbara. Everything we're doing with them is focused on ISIL. So we haven't changed our mission in Syria.
And the Syrians know, they have a broad understanding. I want to go back to Bill's question. You're making clear that the Syrians should now, through the Russians, have a broad understanding of where U.S. forces are operating, and that they should not fly in areas and where they are potentially going to be seen as threatening U.S. forces. So if you were telling them no fly in those areas, is there any way you can explain to us why that is not a no-fly zone?
You can label it what you want, Barbara. I'm explaining to you what we're doing with regard